this is the first of hopefully what will become a more regular occurrence here at Chabad, to do, besides for the regular, consistent classes that I offer, primarily on Monday night's Torah on ZIP, which is a weekly in-depth class on the Torah, starting from the first verse of Bereshit moving forward. Our upcoming JLI course, starting on February 4th, I'll talk about later at the end of the series tonight. But it's good to have different topics, one-time events that are not commitments. You don't have to commit to a series. And it's also especially good to have professionals, guests that are experts in their field, because I can't be an expert in everything. My wife is, but I'm not. So it's a pleasure to be able to bring in professionals in different areas. And tonight we're very honored to have two top lawyers, Gary Handin and Roger Simmons. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for sponsoring tonight's dinner. I told a few people the secret in Chabad is food. And everything else comes afterwards. And God willing, based on the success of tonight, I think we'll do another lecture, I don't know when, maybe March, more of a health focus. And then, I'm always open for your feedback to hear what people are interested in. But it all boils down to our core mission, which is to find innovative ways of sharing the beauty of Judaism, of bringing people into a synagogue, of being a community, of being a center where everyone is welcome. Without any further ado, I'm going to ask someone who's become a very good friend to be the MC of tonight, to try and keep everything under control and to keep the night flowing. He has a lot of experience of running very complicated events with a lot of different speakers, because once a month he hosts the chamber breakfasts. Peter Mason is the executive director of the Tamarack Chamber of Commerce. I am a member of the Tamarack Chamber of Commerce, and some of the other people here are as well. And I am a very happy and a proud member of the Chamber. I've definitely found benefits personally and for the synagogue from the Chamber. Tonight is probably the best example of the benefits, but we've definitely seen tangible benefits. They do a wonderful job. And so I'm going to welcome Peter Mason to be the MC, the Master of Ceremonies for tonight's program. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi. Once a month I have a breakfast with the Tamarack Chamber, and I have to follow the rabbi, and it's so hard and unfair. I've been here 3 or 4 times. I've been here as a seminar on the ethics class that Rabbi Denburg did, a tremendous celebration where I've just felt all the love and warmth of this establishment. And when the rabbi asked me to attend this evening, it was without any doubt that I'd be here. Our first presentation this evening is from a gentleman called Mr. Gary Handin. He began his legal career as an associate with prestigious New York firm Ziegler, Murray, Gill, Glaby and Rigger in 1968. And in 1971 he opened his own firm. Mr. Handin then moved to Coral Springs in 1978 and became General Counsel and Executive Vice President of real estate developer Suncoast of America. In 1983, he left the position to open his own law firm, and I was very proud to celebrate with him in 2012 Small Business of the Year for the Tamarack Chamber of Commerce. So we're going to listen to Gary with his first presentation. All the questions we'll answer at the end. I'd like to give you a welcome to Mr. Gary Handin.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Can everybody hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. And then I prefer not to use it if I may. It's right up here. Thank you. It's a very nice turnout. I welcome everyone here. Before I start, I just want to tell you a little story about an elderly client of mine who told me he had gone into a Catholic church and had gone into the confessional. And when he went into the confessional, he was talking to the priest, and he said to the priest that he had sinned. And he said, Father, I've sinned. And the father asked him, what the whole story was about. And he said, well, last night I went into a bar, and it was almost an empty bar. There was myself, and there was another young lady who was down at the end of the bar, and we were sitting there drinking, and eventually she came over and spoke to me, and we got into a conversation, and we had a few drinks, and then we had a few more drinks, and then we wound up back at her apartment, and we made love all night long. And the father turned to him and said, say 2 Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers, and you'll be absolved of your sins. And the fellow said to him, Father, I can't do that. I'm Jewish. He said, you're Jewish? Well, why are you telling me this? He said, Father, I'm 92. I'm telling everybody. In the same way, I want to make sure that I get this message across to you, because this is something that everyone should know. When you pass away, you won't, obviously, we spend our lives accumulating things. And then upon our death, we want to go to certain people. Now, and the reason for having the will is so that you can tell the world and that how you want it to go, and make sure that it goes that way. Because if you don't leave a will, you die what we call intestate. Intestate means that you have no last will and testament. If you have no last will and testament, some people think that as a result of that, the state tells you where it takes the property. That is not the case. What is the case is if you don't have a will, then state statutes tell you where the property must go. So the most people, we try as attorneys to recommend to our clients that they have a will, and there are alternatives which we'll get into as far as the wills go and the need for one. I'm going to leave that to Roger, and I'm sort of going to skip over it for the moment. Can I see by a show of hands how many people in this room have a will or a trust? That's a fair amount. That's pretty good. Most times I wind up with fewer than that.
What is the difference between will and trust?
I'm going to get to that.
Thank you.
Okay. A will is a paper that states how you want your property to be distributed upon your death. As I said, I'm going to basically leave that to Roger. If you have a will, then upon your death, that will needs to be probated. Now, people get frightened when they hear the word probate. Probate is really not frightening. Probate is just a procedure by which the property that you own while you're alive gets transferred with the direction of the court to whoever it is that you want to have the property that you own. So it sounds like people for some reason become freaked out when they hear that term. But it's a procedure. You go to a lawyer. It's not the type of thing you can usually do on your own, unfortunately, because there's a great deal of time that's involved. But it's basically just a procedure by which the property that you have goes to the people you want it to go to. I'll give you an example. If you own a home and you want to give it to your nephew, he can't just take the deed and go to the county clerk's office and say, here, I want this registered in my name, because here's a copy of the will, and my uncle said that he wanted me to have it. It has to go through a court procedure whereby someone is appointed as a personal representative or executor or executrix, you may have heard that term, so that can, they're appointed by the court after meeting certain qualifications, and that's the person who actually transfers it from you to your nephew in my example. But as far as the will goes, as I said, I'm going to leave that more to Roger. There is a way of avoiding probate, and one of the ways of avoiding probate is by setting up a trust. Now, the trust is a document that's essentially a will substitute. If you put your property, I'm talking about a living trust, there are different types of trusts. You can set up a trust within your will, which is known as a testamentary trust, or you can set up an inter vivos or living trust, and then if you do that, during your lifetime, you transfer your property into your name as trustee of your trust. You may do anything you like with it. You have no less power if it's in a trust than if it's not in a trust. You have total control over that property. But upon your death, it goes to your successor trustee, who then distributes the property. There is no need for a court proceeding. There's no need for any probate. So there are two advantages to a living trust. One of them is that there's no court proceeding, so there's a savings of potentially thousands of dollars in court costs and legal fees. And two, it's much quicker. The average estate takes between 6 and 12 months to go through probate. If you have a living trust, you can distribute the funds within a matter of weeks, if not days. So, as I said, there's no court proceeding at all. So you can also set up a trust in your will, but if you set up a trust in your will, that's going to have to go through probate, so you lose the advantage. But there are other advantages. Let me just say this to you, because it applies to all trusts and the wills. If you leave something to a minor, that minor is going to get whatever property or money you leave them at age 18. I don't know about you, but I don't know too many 18-year-olds who can handle any great amount of money. So a great advantage of these trusts, whether it's a testamentary trust that's in your will, or whether it's an inter vivos or a living trust while you're alive, you can make the children get the money at a later age. So to my clients, I usually recommend to them that they give half the money at, for argument's sake, 21, half the money at 25, half the money at 25, and half the money at 30, figuring that if they blow through the money the first time, at least they've got a second shot at it. But I know 40-year-olds who can't handle money, so it doesn't make it's not a foolproof method. So anyway, when we set up a trust, what we do is we take your property and we put it into a living trust that you control as not only the trustees and the trustor being the person who sets it up, but you're also the beneficiary. So basically, you're doing it for your own benefit. Usually it's husband and wife, and they have one trust together. If one of the couple passes away, the other just continues on. There's no need for a court proceeding. The survivor continues on with the trust. Upon the second of them passing away, then the successor trustee, who the person who formed the trust or the two of you have named, will take over. And when they take over, they'll distribute the funds and your property in accordance with the terms of what you have put into the trust, the same way they would with the will, except that the will, you've got to go through the probate procedure.
This trust is changeable just like a will?
We're going to, if you don't mind, please hold the questions till the end.
Question later?
That's Peter's job.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. You can also set up other trusts, and I know this would be the rabbi's favorite, the charitable trust. Certainly you can give money while you're alive. Certainly you can put it into a will that you want to leave money to a particular charity or to the synagogue or wherever you want to, or your church or wherever you want to leave it. But there are ways of getting the tax benefit of a charitable donation now, but not having to give up the income from the property. So if, for argument's sake, you had a CD that was a $100,000 CD, which will pay about $1.03 a year in interest these days, but you can take that CD, put it into an irrevocable trust. In other words, once you put it in, you can't get it out, but you can have the income from it during your lifetime. It then goes to the charity of your choice upon your death, but you get a tax deduction for it now. I have to tell you that most of my clients, to be honest, are not wealthy enough to do that. But if you happen to be fortunate enough to have a large enough estate where tax consequences are a consideration, then you may want to consider doing a charitable trust. When you form this trust, you also part of the package is what we call a pour-over will. The reason for the pour-over is if you do the trust properly, then all of your property is titled in your name as trustee of your trust. If for some reason you fail to put something into the trust and you have it in your own name upon your death, that then has to go through probate to go into the trust. It pours over into the trust to be distributed in accordance with the terms of the trust. So if you have a trust, you're going to have a will also. It's just that that will, if you do things properly, will never be used. Now, when I do these things for my clients, there are other considerations than just what happens upon their death. So in addition to having a trust and a will, I recommend that they have a durable power of attorney. And that durable power of attorney allows someone to act on your behalf if you were to become disabled. If you were to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, then this person could act on your behalf. If you had a stroke and you were in a coma, the person could act on your behalf. There's a big difference between a durable power of attorney, where you can, the person can do that, and a regular power of attorney, where if you have a stroke and you're in a coma, you can't use a regular power of attorney. So that's something that should be, I think that's as important as having a will, as having a durable power of attorney. Because if you don't have a durable power of attorney, and God forbid you would, let's say, have a stroke and be in a coma, someone is going to have to bring a court proceeding to have you declared incompetent, have them declared as your guardian before they can act on your behalf. The durable power of attorney provides that you can act on their behalf, as well as appointing a health care surrogate so that they can get to your health care records. And because today the hospitals and doctors don't want to talk to you, even spouses sometimes have trouble getting a hold of the medical records and giving directions. So the durable power of attorney is very important. The healthcare surrogate is important. And last but not least, a living will, which says, and there's a situation in the news right now in the state of Texas with someone. This woman was in an irreversible coma, and what it says is that if you're in a vegetative state or you're in an irreversible condition, and the only thing it can do is prolong the dying process, and there's no hope of recovery, then basically you want the plug pulled. So, and that gives authority to whoever you name to do that. So that's basically what I have to tell you. We're talking about a package which includes a trust, a pour-over will, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare surrogate, a living will. Okay, we'll answer questions later. I'm going to turn the floor over to Roger.
So, every time I come here, I just always get some educational value here. I always get something out of... I need to come here more because I just need all this education. There's a few things there that definitely I have questions for, so we'll do the questions again. So, Rabbi, would you like to come up and do your first of two presentations on what happened?
Good evening. I'm going to break up my presentation into two parts to make it short. So the boss calls up his worker, Peter, and he says, "Peter, do you believe in life after death?" He says, "Sure, I believe in life after death." So the boss says, "Well, that explains it. Yesterday, after you left early to go to your grandmother's funeral, she called the office to speak to you." We have a fundamental belief, which is that our soul lived before we were born, and that our soul will continue to live after we die. We know in the very beginning of creation, when man was created, unlike the animals that were created a body and the soul together, God actually formed the body of man out of clay, out of earth, and only after did God blow into his nostrils the breath of life. So the soul existed before, the soul existed, will exist after some things also. The verse actually says, we say it in the funeral service, as the dust returns to earth, so does the soul return to its maker. So the soul goes back to heaven. And in fact, as the Rebbe will point out, this is a simple law in physics. There's a law in physics called the first law of thermodynamics, which is that an energy never ceases to exist. Once an energy is created, it continues to go and go. And so, how much more so a spiritual entity that was never limited in a finite physical dimension continues to exist and continues to continue long after its physical body, its physical home, has ceased to exist. And so, we have to understand that death, although it's terrible, although it's painful, although it's sad, in no way is it the end. In fact, death is just the end of a chapter, but it's the beginning of a whole new section, a whole new part of the life of the soul. It's hard to see it in the physical world, but we have to understand this is the reality. I'll give you an example. Imagine you have two twins that are peacefully growing inside the womb of their mother. They're happy, they're content, they are being fed through their navel, the warm waters of the womb. And they're discussing, and one of the twins is a believer. And he's trying to convince his brother, the skeptic, that underneath, beyond this womb, beyond the mother, there's a whole world. And one day he remembers hearing that we're going to get out of this little closed, cramped quarters, and we'll have room to stretch our legs, and our heads will be upright, and we'll eat through our mouth, and we'll hear through our ears. And the skeptical twin says, you're just straining your imagination. You can only believe things that you can experience. If you can't experience it, if you can't document it, then it can't be real. And the brother says, no. One day we're going to be in the real world and we're going to grow. He says, no. You're just afraid of death. You're afraid of the end. But we're going to, one day the world will cease to exist and we'll just die. Then, one day, the water rips, the water bursts, and the membranes tear open, and chaos ensues, and they hear the pounding and the stress, and they feel the contractions. And the skeptics, you see, I told you the end is coming. It's almost over. And the other one says, no, this is it. This is the birth of something new, something far greater than we ever were. And all of a sudden, the believer falls out of the womb and falls into the world, and the skeptic says, "Ay, the loss of a good friend, of my companion." And sure enough, he hears his brother start to cry. He says, "What a terrible death he must be suffering." But of course, we're laughing because we understand that the exit of the child from the womb is maybe the end of its pregnancy, but it's really the beginning of its life. How much more so the soul, when it leaves this world, is like it's leaving the womb. The exit from the body is in some ways the birth of the real life of the soul where it goes up to heaven. So how does the soul get to heaven? Let me tell you a story, true story. Happened to me 2 years ago. I was actually in Tamarack. Spent a lot of time in Tamarack. I was visiting someone's home, did a show home, and I get a phone call from someone whose sister-in-law's mother is dying in University Hospital. And he asks me, say a prayer for my mother, my sister-in-law's mother, she's dying. His brother's mother-in-law, she's dying, just say a prayer for her. Where is she? She's at the University Hospital. Saying, I was literally right around the corner. I said, I'll go over. And I believe very strongly in going when someone is, in general, I'm there when someone needs, but especially when there's a death or someone's dying, to say the final Shema, the final prayers. It's a very powerful experience. And so I was right there, so I'll go over, I'll be there 2 minutes. Coming, unannounced, she wasn't expecting me, she didn't even call me. I knew who she was only because she'd been there in the shul by a bar mitzvah. I met her once or twice, I didn't know her well. I come in, we start schmooze for a few minutes, and after the preliminary talking for 15-20 minutes, I start to say the prayers. Now, if you just imagine, I'm standing right here, the door is behind me, the son is sitting over here, the mother is lying right over here, she's lying, the daughter-in-law is over there, and there's a bunch of grandchildren over here. Just go through the prayers, And as I finish the Shema, I'm saying the last line. That into your hand, God, I give my soul. Padisa osi Hashem alemus, redeem me, O God of truth. I hear like a commotion behind me. I see the doors behind me. I see the daughter like jump up. And maybe 3 seconds after I finish the last words of the prayer, the son that's holding her hand says she's gone. There's no more pulse. For 2 days she held on, this woman, and they were telling me after they didn't know, the doctors didn't know how she was still alive. The doctors didn't know she was waiting. She was waiting for something. And literally the moment that I said the Shema with her, the moment, her soul went up to heaven. And I've had a similar experience for someone else in a facility on 441 on the Sample and Lions. Same thing, I went there in the morning, I went to go say prayers. The second time I went there, we finished the prayers, the daughter walks me to the car, and she calls me maybe 5 minutes later, I'm still on Sample. And she calls me and says that when I was walking to the car, my mother passed away. She held on, and the moment that I came in and I said the Shema, the soul felt that release. It felt that now I can go to heaven. And I tell it to people all the time. It makes no difference how religious or non-religious the person, your mother, your father was during their lifetime. That lifetime is over. Now they're entering heaven. And I can promise you that they want to enter heaven on the right foot. Every single student enters school the first day saying, I'm going to be better this year, I want to do good. Whether or not they do or not is a separate story, but at least the first day they want to come in the right foot. Guarantee the soul of your mother or your father or your brother, they want to enter heaven the right way. They want to go with the Shema. They want to be buried properly. They want the proper rituals. They're starting a whole new life. And in fact, that's why when a person dies, they die with their eyes open. Because at the moment of death, the soul is actually going towards the Shekhinah, going towards the divine presence. And the soul sees the Shekhinah coming to greet it, and because of the tremendous divine revelation, it actually stays with the eyes open. And it also says that the family members that have previously passed away, the parents of this person that passed, and the siblings, whoever relatives are up in heaven, come from heaven to greet this soul that's coming, and they welcome him outside of heaven to bring them in. There's many stories. Very briefly. There's a story in the Talmud of Rabbi Shubal Levi, whose son actually had one of these near-death experiences where his soul actually left his body. When he came back, so his father asked him, what did you see? So he said, I saw an upside-down world. Upside-down world. Where I saw the people that are in that world, that are on there, the people that are in this world are like nobodies. And people that are important and prestigious in this world are the nobodies upstairs. So his father says, no, you saw the world of truth. This world is the upside-down world. But the soul sees what's going on in heaven while it's still somewhat connected to the body. It's a gradual process. It's not a set of moments. It's a gradual process. Sometimes it can take a day or 2 days where the soul is slowly leaving the body and it actually sees the body. It kind of like feels this feeling of detachment from the body and it like sees what's happening around it. Which is why the way we conduct ourselves in the presence of a dead body is extremely important. With tehillim, certain respect. I once was in a room with a person that passed away, and the two brothers that did not talk were on the phone screaming and cursing at each other. The soul cannot enter heaven itself until the body is laid to its final rest. And this is why in Jewish law we are very, very careful, do everything we can to speed up the burial as fast as we can. In fact, if you go to the religious communities, you go to Israel, they bury the body the same night. It'll be 2 o'clock in the morning. Even in Williamsburg and Borough Park, in the really strong religious communities, we don't wait. And the reason for that is because as long as the person is not physically buried and the body has not been laid to its final rest, then the soul cannot enter its final resting place either. So it's what we say in Yiddish, nishtahin, nishtaher. It's not here, but it's not there. The soul is in limbo. And it's a very painful time for the soul. So therefore we do everything we can to try and expedite the process to make it happen as soon as possible. And then we have the Shiva period, the 7 days of Shiva, which is obviously a time when we're mourning together with the family and we're giving support to the family. but it's actually also a time when we mourn together with the soul. The soul feels the pain of the family, and the soul feels the pain of his body that's been laid into the grave. And so the soul is not judged until the end of the Shiva. The soul is kind of still connected to that body and is in pain. And so the mourning of that Shiva period is a mourning for the soul as well. We're going to have Raj, and then after they're going to talk about what is the experience in heaven like, what happens, what does it feel like, etc.
Thank you, Rabbi. I could definitely relate to that when I lost my mother-in-law last year, and I was actually in the room, and I just kept thinking about that while during your presentation. So I think everyone can kind of relate to what you've just spoken about. So, Mr. Simmons, you'd have to follow that. A tough task, but I know you're up to it. Roger graduated in Miami in 1993 and became a member of the Florida Bar in 1994. After practicing with various law firms over 18 years, Mr. Simmons opened his own law office in Tamarack not so long ago, and he specialized in Social Security, disability, supplemental security income, and workers' compensation. Mr. Simmons is married to Eileen, and they have 5 children between them both. Mr. Simmons, would you like to come up and do your presentation?
I would. Apparently nobody likes the microphone tonight, so I'll try to keep my voice up. Good evening, and thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the dinner. I've been sitting over there trying to rack my brain, trying to think of a joke I could tell. Gary the Rabbi, but unfortunately I couldn't think of anything that was clean. So I'm just going into my little spiel
Doesn't have
here.
to be clean.
So I'm sure you all recall that last year actor James Gandolfini passed away, and when he passed away, he left an estate of worth approximately $70 million. And unfortunately, what the New York Daily News referred to as a catastrophe, his will left about 80% of his estate unprotected against estate taxes, with rates that will add up to about 55% when you take into consideration federal taxes and state taxes, which they have in New York, as you well know if you're from New York, a few other states like California. And the worst part is some well-established estate planning techniques, such as Gary has been talking about, could have easily avoided much of that bill, while still achieving much of what Mr. Gandolfini was trying to accomplish. But he was generous after giving about $1.6 million to various friends and relatives, and unfortunately I wasn't one of those, and making provisions for his personal property and his house in Italy and land in Italy. He split the remainder of his estate between 4 people. 30% went to his 2 sisters, 20% to his wife, and 20% to his daughter. His son received a life insurance policy, which didn't have to go, isn't subject to estate tax, didn't have to go through probate. And like I said, unfortunately, Mr. Gandolfini missed a opportunity using well-established estate planning techniques to save a lot of that money and go to the people he intended the money to go to instead of to federal taxes and the state of New York. Well, at least Mr. Gandolfini had a will. Many celebrities actually who died unexpectedly did not have wills, such as Jimi Hendrix, Amy Winehouse, and Barry White. So it's important to at least have a will in place, although, as Gary indicated, the will doesn't avoid probate. But in reviewing your own estate planning situation, be sure you take some of the following into consideration. Make sure you have a will in place. Doing so is the best way to make sure the right people get what you intend for them to get. As Gary indicated, if you die without a will, the state of Florida is going to decide who inherits what you leave behind, and it might not be in the way you intended. I know planning for your own death is an unpleasant and uncomfortable subject, and I know I'm only thinking about my own. But being prepared can prevent heartache and financial distress for your loved ones and your heirs. And in doing so, here are just a short list of the documents you should consider in your estate plan. As indicated, you should have a last will and testament or a living trust. And which one you do depends on your circumstances. For people looking to minimize any estate tax or have special situations such as a child with special needs, a living trust may be a better option since it can preserve a large amount of the estate by minimizing taxes. Well, and a will is where you basically leave your personal property and other. A bank account, you should make sure that on your bank account you leave it. You tell the bank that you want to leave it. If you pass away, somebody else will get it. Put a person on there as a person to receive the proceeds of the bank account, transferable on death or payable on death to the person you want to leave it to. That way that doesn't have to go through probate. And like I said, if you die intestate, the state will decide who gets what the property. In addition to having a will, you should have documents that Gary discussed, the advanced medical directive or living will, and that's the document that designates who makes healthcare decisions for you in case you're unable to. These decisions can include whether you like medical care, whether you want to be on a life support system, or whether you don't want to be on a life support system. And you can also put in there whether or not you want to have an autopsy done, or let the person who is your who's making a decision for you make that determination. You could put in there also any plans you have for cremation, or burial, or and organ donor choices. And the other document is the durable power of attorney, which Gary went into, which is almost mandatory to have nowadays. With this document, you can establish who's able to write checks for you, manage your property if you're unable to, take control of your finances if you're unable to. And as indicated, wills do not avoid probate. And some of the experiences I had recently with the probate system was a nice lady in New York City who owned property out here, and even though she paid for the property, she put her parents' names on the property because she wanted them to feel good. Now, they passed away about 10 years ago, but she never had their names taken off of the property, so when she went to sell it, she couldn't, the title company wouldn't issue coverage unless it went through probate to get the parents' names removed, which means I had to file probate action for them and file the wills. And as Gary indicated, it took a good 6 to 9 months before the judge signed off for it before she could get the property transferred into her name so that she could sell it. I had another person living in New York whose father died down here, and the only property he left was a bank account, and the bank account didn't have anybody else's name on it, wasn't made payable or transferable on death to the daughter, so I had to file a probate action for her just so I could get his name. Have the judge award her, because he didn't have a will either, so she was the only living relative, so the judge could award and the money in the bank account to her. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of money in the bank account, and probate, I think she paid over $380 for the probate, so part of the money went there, so she's not going to get a lot when it's done. And the other person I have was in a similar situation, which could have all been taken care of if they had a right trust or had transferable on death or payable on death. So these are all things that you need to keep in mind and think about your family. It's a loving thing to do for your family. And in summation, I cannot stress enough the importance of securing your family's future and leaving a legacy behind. And as I said, it's not something you really, dealing with your own death is not something you want to think about. And I've had to do that in my own situation, but it's going to happen sometime, sooner or later.
Think about your question during Rabbi's second presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. So this 85-year-old couple is tragically killed in a terrible car. Well, I have a joke for you, by the way. When there's a will, there's a relative. Just keep that for next time. Okay, so this 85-year-old couple is tragically killed in the car accident. They go up to heaven, they come to the pearly gates, and the angel looks at their record and says, you guys were really well behaved, you were good people, you're going straight to paradise. You go up to, the angel says, let me show you your new quarters. You come to this beautiful, beautiful mansion, huge, stunning, with jacuzzis and granite countertops, the entire patio overlooking this beautiful golf course. And the husband, always worried about the money, says, how much is it going to cost to live here? And the angel says, it's free, we're in heaven, no cost. It's yours to enjoy forever. Wow. You look out at the golf course, it's a beautiful golf course. The angel says, you don't know how beautiful it is. Every single week this golf course changes to another one of the most beautiful, fanciest golf courses in the world. So how much does it cost to be a member, to get to go golfing here? He says, nothing, you're in heaven, it's free. Wow, sounds good. Then they go to the clubhouse. He sees a smorgasbord, a cuisine like he's never seen before. It's like 2 cruise ships combined in one. There's food galore. He's looking at all the food. He says, how much does it cost to eat here? And the angel says, what don't you understand? This is heaven. Everything is free. There's no calories. You don't gain any weight. You won't ever get sick here. There's no diabetes from the sugar. Enjoy it to your heart's content. So this old man looks at his wife with a dirty look and says, if not for you and your bran muffins, we could have been here 10 years ago. Okay, heaven is not about eating food. It's not about these angels with halos over their head, playing on the harps. And yes, Judaism does believe in hell. And hell is not this guy with a big pitchfork that you find on the covers of the cans of non-kosher meat. Right? So what exactly is heaven? What is hell? Let's first talk about hell, because that's the more exciting topic.
Are we here now?
We're here now.
This is not my first wife.
What?
This is not my first wife.
Hell is not God getting revenge on you for all the things you've done wrong in your lifetime. Hell is really a purification process. Just as silver has to be purified by going through fire, so too the soul has become a little tainted, become a little dirty in its time here in this world. And in order to go into heaven, in order to bask in the glory of the Shekhinah, in order to truly absorb the glory of what it's going to receive in heaven, it has to be a pure vessel. It has to be cleansed. And so hell is nothing more than a cleansing process. Now, a cleansing process might hurt. I'm sure if you could talk to your shirts that you put into the washing machine, they would tell you they don't like being washed. The bleach burns their eyes, and the hot water is too hot for them, and they get dizzy in the dryer. But that's part of the drying, of the cleansing process. And so too our souls go through a cleansing process, which is what we would call Gehenna, or hell. And yet, no matter how painful and how suffering this hell is, it's worth it. The Talmud tells us another story of a man called Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya was once one of the greatest sages, a big scholar. And it's a very long story, it's a very interesting story, but suffice to say that one day he became a heretic. He became such a heretic that he became called Acher, the other one. They don't want to refer to him by name. And when he came to heaven, when he passed away, he came before the heavenly court, they didn't know what to do with him. On one hand, he was a huge scholar. He had taught tremendous amounts of Torah. So they wanted to, but they couldn't send him to hell because he was a scholar. On the other hand, they couldn't put him to heaven because he had sinned every kind of sin. And so eventually they didn't know what to do with him, and Rabbi Meir, who was a student of Acher, said a decree to let him go into hell, let him be cleansed of the ultimate punishment of hell, so he can eventually go into heaven afterwards. Which means that no matter how bad that suffering is, it's worth it. It also means that the concept of eternal hell or eternal damnation is completely foreign to Judaism. It's only a cleansing process. It's a stage in order to get to heaven. So what exactly does the soul experience? It comes to the heavenly court. And in the heavenly court they do a reckoning. They have these big scales and they bring out the books and they see everything you've done good and everything you've done bad. But in heaven they don't judge you. The soul judges itself. Because what's really happening now that the soul is in heaven, the soul is all of a sudden given a pair of glasses and he sees true reality. And all of a sudden the soul feels and experiences the bliss of the things he has done right. And he feels this unbelievable guilt and shame and terrible feeling from the things he has done wrong. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're watching this great symphony orchestra on TV. There's only one problem. The volume is turned off. And so you're watching this guy flapping his arms around. You're watching the guy, their cheeks are popping and they're banging and they're drumming and they're running all around the place. But the sound is off so you don't hear anything. And you're giving the violin, you're part of this orchestra. But you don't hear any sound. And then all of a sudden we turn the sound on. Now you can go back and rewind all of the moves and all the instruments you played throughout your life. And so it can be a lot of nachas, it can be very enjoyable to watch you playing, or it can be terribly painful to watch how you destroy the entire song, right, with your wrong notes. That is what's really happening to the soul. After that judging period, after being forced to watch his entire life on this big plasma screen TV in front of all of his family and friends, and going through that shame, he goes through different stages of hell. There's very briefly, there's chibut hakever, which is where the body is kind of decomposed in the grave to atone for the physical, tangible pleasures of physical indulgences. It goes through kaf hakela, which is a spiritual slingshot, where it experiences the highs of what he could have done and then the lows of what he did wrong. Go through a fire of hell, which is an atonement for those sins that were done in the heat of the moment with passion. Go through a fire of snow for the sins that were done with coldness, with apathy. And then it comes to heaven. And heaven is where the soul can truly grasp the beauty of God. Every single Jew, every single soul rather, goes to heaven. The only question is what seat will you get? Right? Everyone's going to go to the orchestra. But you can get a front row seat, or you can get a back row seat up in the nosebleed section. But every single soul eventually enters heaven. How long can hell take? A maximum of 12 months. And that's why we say Kaddish for 11 months. We say Kaddish when the person passes away as an atonement for the soul. One reason we say Kaddish is to help the soul be atonement, to alleviate the suffering of the soul. But yet the Ramah writes we only say Kaddish for 11 months because we want to show we're so certain that by 11 months our relative, our parent, has already been atoned for all their sins and they've already finished with the cleansing process and they've already entered into heaven.
Because we minus the 30?
Nothing to the 30. There's a beautiful story in the Talmud. Rabbi Akiva once visited a graveyard. It's great to say Rabbi Akiva, and he comes and he sees this old man bent over a huge load of sticks. And his face and his body was terribly burnt and disfigured. Rabbi Akiva saw it was a soul that was coming back into the body. And so he asked this man, tell me what terrible sin have you done that you're being tortured as such, that you're not even in hell, that you're here gathering wood. And so he said, I was a terrible, terrible sinner. And I've been excommunicated from hell. He said, they won't even let me into the cleansing process. I'm still in this kafakel, this in-between back and forth stage. And so Rabbi Akiva says to him, tell me, what could I do to atone for your soul that you can be able to enter hell to be cleansed? And he says, there's nothing you can do. The only thing that can happen is if my son would say Kaddish for me, then his Kaddish would atone for me. But I never taught my son any Judaism, never took him to Hebrew school, can't read Hebrew, so anything. So nothing. So he says, I'm going to teach him. Where does his son live? He told him, listen, this place. He traveled to that place. His man was a butcher. He says, where is the son of this butcher? He says the name of the person that had passed away. Tom doesn't say his name. And they tell him that. They spit on the ground and say, that person. And they tell him who the kid is. Eventually finds a kid, completely uninterested, this terrible, vagrant, was uneducated, was unpolite. Rekiva spends time and he slowly teaches him how to read Hebrew, how to the Aleph Beis, and eventually teaches him how to say Kaddish. He brings him to the synagogue and they say Kaddish together. And a few nights later, this man came to Rabbi Akiva in a dream, and he said to him, I bless you that may your mind always be at rest, because you have finally allowed me to come to rest. And so, when the soul is going through this cleansing, in order to enter heaven, when we say Kaddish here in this world, or if we pay someone to say Kaddish on our behalf, you have to pay them, they should be your agent, then that Kaddish helps the soul. But I want to point out that Kaddish is not only to alleviate the suffering, because we also say Kaddish for a righteous person, for a tzaddik that passed away. We also say Kaddish on the yard sites. For many, many years, on the day of the anniversary of the passing, we say the Kaddish prayer, long after there's any atonement left. Saying Kaddish also helps elevate the soul. That's what the Kaddish is, Yiskadla v'Yiskadash Shmei Rabba, which means, may his name be exalted, be sanctified. By sanctifying the name of God, we're actually elevating and sanctifying the soul as well. The only other mitzvah that has the power to elevate the soul, like that, is charity. Besides the charity and the will, which can help for yourself. But charity is the only mitzvah that's in the image of God. Because charity is basically emulating God. God is kind and charitable with us. And so when we give charity, we're copying Him. And it's the only other way we can exalt God's name, similar to the Kaddish. There is a concept of reincarnation, but we're not going to talk about it tonight. That's for another lecture, for another time. Where if the soul didn't finish its mission, it has to come back into the earth again. And now with the concept of resurrection. Resurrection means there is going to come a day, the Jewish concept, when Mashiach will come, when the suffering and death will be erased from the earth, and we're going to enter the world again. By the way, a side note, interesting side note. After Titus destroyed Jerusalem, and he came back to Rome, they asked him where all of the soldiers. And he said that I left a large regiment of soldiers over the graveyard where we buried the Jewish soldiers, because I'm afraid they're going to come back to life as is prophesied, and they're going to take back Israel. So he actually left a regiment of soldiers to guard the graveyard that the Jews should be resurrected. Side note. But the idea of resurrection, very briefly, is that here in this world, I have to say one point, is an era of achievement. In this world, because we don't have the volume turned on the TV, and because we don't appreciate the value of every mitzvah that we do, therefore it has value. God appreciates when we do it. Once you enter heaven, there is no value in your achievement anymore. Now you're only getting the reward. You're seeing what you have done. The resurrection, which will come in the world to come after Mashiach comes, is the soul being put back into the body. And that's how we know that anyone that has ever passed away will come back to this earth. We'll all be back alive. And at that point, the soul is able to receive reward for the good it has done while inside the body. Again, there's also much more to this concept. I'm going to leave it at this. But because we believe in resurrection, is why it is so crucially important that a person cannot be cremated. There's many reasons, but one of the reasons is because the act of cremation basically means that you don't believe in the resurrection. You don't believe that one day Mashiach will come and our bodies will come back to life. To believe in God bringing us back to life is as feasible as God making us be born. We take it for granted. But the same way a child can be born, so too a body can be resurrected. It's not any more miraculous. By cremating, you're basically saying, I don't believe that my body will be resurrected. And therefore the Talmud states in the Tractate Sanhedrin that every single person will be resurrected except for those who don't believe in resurrection. Which is what cremation is basically saying. And that's why the ultimate mitzvah is to help someone who is not going to be buried properly, or is, even they're being buried, but to be there at the funeral, to help with the digging of the grave, to go to the Shiva home. It's called the Chesed Shalemus. It's called the kindness of truth. Before Jacob passed away, he said to his son, do me a kindness of truth and bury me in Israel. Because whenever you do someone a favor, you always expect something in return. Even if they don't tell you you're going to do something, but you know that they owe you a favor. But when someone is dead, there's no return favor coming. It's the ultimate kindness. God willing, very soon we should come to the day when there's no more death in the world. And I want to end up with this final story. The Zusha of Andipol, one of the great Hasidic masters of a few hundred years ago, said, I know when I come to heaven, they're not going to ask me, why were you not like Abraham? They're not going to ask me, why were you not like Moses? They're going to ask me, Zusha, why were you not like Zusha? They're going to ask each and every one of us, why were we not the best that we could be? And so until that day that there's no more death in the world, as we said before, it's inevitable. Let's prepare ourselves, make sure that we give it all we've got. We have to be the best that we can be, because that's what they're going to be demanding from us up in heaven.
Well, thank you. 4 presentations, and we're going to questions right now. We have a 2-minute video at the end of the questions, so Rabbi, if you'd let me know about the timing, we'll try and get everybody a question. If you raise your hand, I'll come over with the mic, and then if you'd like to say your name, and if you're directing it to one of the gentlemen presenting, the Rabbi, if not, I'll just kind of call it. So, who's going to be first up? There is no question. Commissioner Pam.
My name is Pam, and I want to know what we do with our documents. I have a will, I have a living will, I have an estate trust, I have all of that. I have a lawyer who's not in this state any longer. So when I die, what happens to all these papers?
Gary, do you want to take that one? Do you have a safe deposit box?
No.
I would recommend that you get a safe deposit box where you put the documents, and make sure that someone else has access to that safe deposit box, and that you give them instructions on where your documents are. With regard to the durable power of attorney, that durable power of attorney is in effect as soon as you sign it.
Right.
So unless you want them to act on your behalf now, you wouldn't want to give it to them. You would just want to make them aware of where they can find those documents. When people leave my law office, they leave with 3 executed copies, 3 duplicate originals of the documents. And I tell them to put 1 in the safe deposit box, put 1 at home where if something happened to them, people would, whoever their relatives are, would find it. And then the 3rd one, generally I don't to schlep around with, because if they're going to have a trust, they're going to have a copy to go to the bank, to go to the stockbroker, to go wherever they have to go. And that way they've got it. Then I keep an original in my file, so that everything has my name on it that they have told me. I've always got an original.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Same topic, I was advised by an attorney that you should always give a copy to the people in that will, who are in that trust. Is that true? You don't agree with that?
What's your next question?
My name is Mark, and on the same topic, I was advised by an attorney that who's ever in the will or in the trust should get a copy of it. My brother's in it, my nieces are in it, my children are in it. They should have a copy of that will. Do you agree to that or not?
With all due respect to whatever attorney told you that, I most wholeheartedly disagree, because if you put 2 people in a room, you're going to get 3 opinions on what should be done. It's nobody's business what's in your will until
That's
such
what
time.
an executive for it, right?
Until such time as you pass away. It's not a matter of public record, doesn't get filed anywhere. So It's nobody's business. Suppose you left something to someone, and tomorrow you change your mind. Now you've given it to them. You've given them a copy of something that's not going to be in effect, because any change you can make is going to revoke the previous will.
I agree with that. Dual power of attorney versus a regular power of attorney. What was the main difference between these two?
Okay, let me give you an example. On a regular power of attorney, if I say, listen, I have this transaction, this real estate transaction in New York. I'd like to appoint you my power of attorney. Hop on a plane and go up and sign the papers for me. Okay. If when you're on the plane, I have a stroke, you can't use that power of attorney. That power of attorney is only as good as I am, and since I'm in a coma, you can't act for me because I couldn't act. The durable power of attorney is a creation of the legislature where they actually did something that's useful. You would, in spite of the fact, that same set of facts, in spite of the fact that I became incapacitated, you as my power of attorney would be able to act. And that's the advantage of the durable power of attorney.
So it should always be durable.
Yes.
Unless it's for a specific reason.
The only thing we use regular powers of attorney for are temporary situations, transient situations, where you don't want to, somebody wants you to do something today, not long term. It's not an estate planning tool.
I just wanted to add something, because of course, when you have a will and whatnot, you can have a personal representative and named in there. So of course you can have a conversation with them beforehand to make sure, they agree to do that, because it's a lot of responsibility to be the personal representative on the will, and they will generally know, like with the living will, what you want done, and with the durable power of attorney, so they have some idea. So you should have a conversation with them. But I agree with Gary that they don't need to have the documents.
The other thing is that you don't particularly want to put in your will, and I have this request from time to time, put in your will what your burial plans are, because in many cases that will is not discovered until you've been buried. And if you didn't want to be buried, or you wanted to be buried above ground, you didn't want to be buried underground, whatever. So that's not putting the directions in the will. It's not a great way to have done what you want. Just make sure that the person who's the personal representative has instructions on what you want done.
Any more questions on that topic, or does everybody have a new question that they'd like to ask? Yes, ma'am. May I take your name?
Hi. Can I change my will if I want it?
Yes.
My will?
Yes, you can change your will.
Yes.
If it's a minor change, you do a will consult, and you can do it as well. Any time that would, if you do a new will, then the old will wouldn't count anymore.
Do you have an example of how many times somebody's come and changed their will, and has it been appropriate? Give us an example of why somebody would change their will 3 times.
Well, the situations change, and I generally recommend that you review your will every 3 years to see if anything's changed. Some people change their mind about who they want to leave things to in the will, so then of course they're going to want to come in and make sure they do a will consult or do a brand new will. But you got to always be, you just don't throw it into a drawer and not look at it again. You got to always, because situations change.
Is it to involve a lawyer in this situation, or you can do it on your own, just getting the papers and change it, or I have to be in the front of you?
Well, of course, I always recommend getting an attorney.
I don't think you can do it yourself,
No.
because a will needs to be executed with particular formality, and it's not something, and you can't change it by saying, I don't want to leave Susie this, so I'll cross our name out, and I leave it to Fred instead, and I'll write in Fred and just initial it. That doesn't work. But I agree with Roger. It should be reviewed every 2 to 3 years. Sometimes the people who you named in your will have passed away, so you may want to change it. The person you named as personal executive, as personal representative or executor, may have passed away. So there are various reasons. I have people who come into my office every 12 to 18 months and change their will because something. And the older you get, the more chance there is that there's going to be a change of some kind. That's all.
And Florida also has a self-executing provision, so if you do the will yourself, you don't have that self-executing provision, then if you pass away, one of the people that witnessed the will is going to have to go down to the courthouse, and if they're still around, and swear on it, sign an affidavit saying that they witnessed you signing the will. So you got to be careful.
Yes, your name?
My name is Sarah. I had a question in reference living trust. How many trustees we can mention in that document just in case something happened to the first one?
You can as long as you can name them consecutively, and you can say that if I pass away, because it's your trust, you're going to be the initial trustee, then I name so-and-so. And if that person fails to act or dies before you or can't act for any reason, I name so-and-so. And if you want to do that again, you can do it again. And most people name at most 2 additional ones because, as a practical matter, that's generally all they need.
Okay.
And you would generally want to name someone who is younger than you, not someone who is older than you.
Exactly. And in the same document, because I'm very interested in the living trust, is that's the best document to guard children?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. In my opinion, also.
Let me just, I just want to tell, Roger told him a story about someone who didn't have a will. And I had a client who came in, and it happened to be a Latin couple, and he had passed away, and he was very macho during his lifetime, and he was so macho that he only wanted his house only in his name, and he didn't put it in his name and his wife's name. And then he was killed in an industrial accident, and as a result of that, he had no will. It went in testacy, and the laws of the state of Florida say that the wife gets a life estate, and the 2 children own the house. The 2 children were like 3 and 5. Not only did she lose the husband's income, but she did not have enough money to have guardians appointed for the children to act on their behalf, so that they could at least sell the house between her and the two kids.
Yeah,
the bottom line is she lost the house. Bottom line is she lost the house. Bottom line is she lost the house. If he had had a will, or if he had put the house in his name and his wife's name as husband and wife, they wouldn't have had that. They wouldn't have had that problem. And I don't know if it'll apply to anybody here, but one of the best protections you can have from creditors is you take a piece of property and you put it with your name and your spouse's name. It's what we call tenants by the entirety. It's a special kind of joint tenancy for husband and wife.
Thank you. I think we have another question from Mark.
On the same topic of living wills, living trust, I looked into it. I was in New York, and I asked him, what if I want to change something in it? He wanted a couple $1,000s to do the living trust, and he said every time I change it, it's going to cost a few $1,000s. Is this typical?
I can't tell you what's typical in New York, even though I'm licensed in New York. Here I can tell you that if you want to make a change, same way Roger was talking about making a codicil to a will, you can make changes to a trust and change it just about anything that's in there, but you have to do it by way of amendment. Again, you can't scratch it out initially. However, the cost of an amendment to the trust, if it's a simple amendment, like changing, let's say changing beneficiary, changing successor trustee, something like that, not rewriting the whole trust. If it's something like that, the cost is approximately $250.
What if we're adding a house to it? You're putting a house now to...
If you're putting a house in it, there should be no change at all. All you're going to do is title that house in the name of the trust. You don't need to change the trust at all.
Okay.
And by the way, another advantage to the trust is if you don't have a trust and you own property in 2 states, let's say you have your homestead here and you have a summer home in North Carolina, if you don't have a trust, when you die, guess what? You're going to have a probate here, and you're going to have an ancillary probate in North Carolina. You can pay for it twice.
I have a question. Your name, please.
Yeah, my name is Deborah. I just want to know if you have a mortgage, and which of course is not paid in full, what will happen if you pass away? What happens if you have children? In the case that I know that there is an existing insurance that the bank put on. In case that you pass away, the house will be paid for. But in case that you don't have that insurance, what will happen with that mortgage?
I had a situation recently, actually, where a client, her father died and left the nobody else's name was on the property, and she wanted to. He actually owed more on the property than the property was worth, so she just wanted to give it back to the bank. The bank says, we can't take it. We can't take it back from you. You have to put it into your name first, so we can. So I had to go through probate with her. In that sort of situation, you can expound on it more.
If you don't have insurance, and the kind of insurance that you're talking about is very unusual for somebody to have that declining. It's a declining balance life insurance policy. So if you start off with a $200,000 mortgage, as the years go on, you're paying premiums, and the amount of coverage goes down to cover the mortgage amount. That's unusual, very frankly, and most people don't have it. And but if you don't have insurance to pay it off, then that mortgage is still on the house, and the estate of the person is still required to make payments on that mortgage, or the house has. If they don't, then the bank will foreclose. Now, if you want to keep the house, you're going to have to go through probate and have it delivered to whoever it was left to, and that person can go about refinancing that mortgage, but they're not entitled to just keep living there and not pay the mortgage. If you run into a situation like Roger's talking about, where the house is worth less than the money that's owed on it, we can't do a short sale, and but I can't go into it now because it's just too long and involved. But go into it depends on whether there are other assets in the estate. Sometimes it doesn't pay, and just let the bank take it back. There's no equity in it. There are no other assets that the bank is going to be able to get to. So let it go.
Yeah, and the reason why, because my person, the father actually had a will that left the property to her, so she had to go through probate to transfer the property into her name before she could the bank would take it back. So.
Question over there?
I don't need a microphone.
Okay.
Your name is?
Yeah, hi, I'm Yoni. My question is more like general, but it might be any offense, so please don't take it. I had experience with people who had dueling brothers and sisters. How strong is the power of attorney against them? That is my question, pretty much.
If the power of attorney is executed properly,
yes,
the power of attorney rules. However, the power of attorney is only good while you're alive. So when you die, there is no more power of attorney. Then you're left with dealing with the will or the trust.
Then how strong is the will against the, for example, doesn't he go to, doesn't the will, where does he go to hold, for instance, if Joe Schmo is arguing with his sister, and they want Joe Schmo to get the intestine, the inheritance, but his sister argues, so how does, you know what I'm saying?
Well, whoever's in charge, whoever's named as personal representative in the will, has the ultimate authority.
Right, and there's no way to, after the person is gone, to argue what you want.
You can argue what you want. You can bring, and if you want to, you can bring a legal action challenging who the personal representative is. But in most cases, if it's been executed properly and there hasn't been any undue influence on the person to make the will that way, chances are that it's going to fail and the will is going to control it.
Oh, okay.
It'll be the probate judge who will make that determination.
And a question back to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
What is the same?
My name is Nora.
right?
With the durable power of attorney, does that stop also when the person dies?
Yes. Yeah, so the power of attorney is only good while you're alive. Once you die, then you're left.
So then the example that you gave, if that person was deceased instead of went into a coma, you wouldn't have any.
That's correct. The example I gave, you wouldn't be able to act.
Right.
I had a question there.
I do, and I don't speak loud. One thing in my will, I have left $1 to anybody who contests my will. So that just makes it so if those relatives come out of the woodwork that you haven't the slightest knowledge of, then they get $1, and they can't do anything further. At least that's what the lawyer said. But I want to go back to the durable power of attorney, because my mother lived in California, had the durable power of attorney. That was me. I had the key to the bank box, and the bank wouldn't allow me access because I didn't have the original power of attorney in my hand. It was in that box. So it was rather a vicious circle. I couldn't get in the box because they wouldn't allow me to. So that is why I don't put my documents in one, because I'm afraid the same thing might occur. But I know California is peculiar in it.
But Pam, if you remember, I said put an original in a safe deposit box. Keep another at home where your relatives will be able to find it if something were to happen to you. Because the bank was exactly right. You didn't have the original. That's also why.
So you're saying you have to have more than one copy of an original?
Right, more duplicate originals. Also, you obviously were not authorized to get into that safe deposit box, and that is what I would recommend. You have someone else.
Yes, I was authorized, except that she went into the hospital before the signature was put on the card. So my name was on there. She gave permission, but I hadn't been there to sign.
Had you been, you would have just gone into the safe deposit box, gotten the original.
No problem.
Right.
Thank you.
We're going to do one more last question, and I want to thank the gentleman for coming here this evening.
But this question is for the rabbi. When you mentioned in the first part, you say that the prayer is very important before for the soul before die, right? I was seeing that happen, or to apply when a person is dying because he's sick and somebody is around there. What happened when it's an accident, a car accident, or an unexpected die? One person, there is no chance to a prayer.
It's a problem.
That's the question. What happened in that case with that soul?
There actually are some people that have the custom of saying the confessional prayers you say before you die every night before they go to sleep. I personally don't have that custom, but some people do it. I guess Yom Kippur. Yeah, if a person dies unexpected, it's unexpected. There's nothing that can be done. But ideally, if you have the advance notice, you should do the prayers. Anything? Let me thank both Roger and Gary for a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you very much. I think this was a very special opportunity to hear two professionals and get to ask you questions and see what's on your mind, as well as give it a Jewish twist. And God willing, we'll do it again.